She said on today's debate, when asked about One Nation, that voters might be looking at voting for One Nation to spice things up.
Yeah.
Let's spice things up. Why would you say that? That's the equivalent if you're at the bar and you look at your mates and you say, do you want to get fucked up? And then you start doing shots. She's basically just said to everyone, let's do shots. Let's all just vote for One Nation. Why would you do that? Hi, Social Democrats. It's Stephen here. We want to get to know you better. So we've launched the Socially Democratic Listener Survey. It's just 15 quick questions and will only take about 3 minutes to complete, and it's completely confidential. And as a thank you for doing so, anyone who completes the survey will go into the draw to win a trip to Adelaide for the 2026 ALP National Conference, which is happening in July this year, including return domestic flights and accommodation. If you are from Adelaide, then we're going to fly you to Melbourne for one of our live shows leading up to the Victorian state election. To take part in this listener survey, just click the link in this episode's show notes and let us know everything that is important to you in terms of your podcast, Socially Democratic. Thanks. And we've had quite a few new Patreon members join our Socially Democratic community this month, and I'd like to give them a shout out. So welcome to Baden Kurgan, Lachlan McCarthy, Paddy Cashman, Matthew Moe, and Simon Hammersley. Hi, Simon. And as a paid-up member of Patreon, you get to ask questions and send nominations for our regular Feeny Files with Jesse McCrone and mailbag episodes. And if you'd like to join our active community, then simply go to patreon.com/socially democratic. And there's also a link in the show notes. The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a Wednesday evening on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And this is our final episode where we recap the South Australian state election campaign before the polls actually close, to help me recap the week that was and turn our attention to what Saturday is going to look like, the seats that we need to keep an eye on, and how we think things will bear out. I am joined once again by my two favourite South Australians, Matt Clemow from Capital, former government chief of staff, Labor stalwart. Welcome back to the show.
How are you, Stephen?
And Hannah MacLeod, also Labor stalwart, and the executive director of MacLeod South Australia. Welcome back to the show.
Great to be here.
Hannah's, if you're watching the YouTube version, Hannah's put a lot of effort into getting the background looking very, very pristine. I just want that to be acknowledged. Okay. Finally, we've had some polling. We've had nothing to talk about when it's been coming to research. Now we can do demographics as destiny kind of conversation. Starting with, we had a YouGov poll out. Actually, no, I'll do the one from yesterday. There was a Fox and Hedgehog. Still don't believe that's a real polling company. Released theirs yesterday. The primary was Labor 38, Libs 18, One Nation 22, Greens 11, Other, that is the people who haven't made up their minds yet, 12, which gives a two-party preferred ALP 60, Liberal 40, if you were to throw the preferences to the Liberal Party, even though they're on 18 and One Nation's on 22. But if you were to throw preferences to the One Nation Party, it's not much of a difference. It's 59-41 to Labor. There was a YouGov poll out today, and that is eerily similar. Labor 38, Liberals 19, One Nation 22, Greens 12, and undecideds 5. That seems low. There must be another in there, I guess. But anyway, two-party preferred, ALP 59, Libs 41, and versus One Nation, ALP 59, One Nation 41. with days to go. I wonder if Newspoll are going to do one on Friday morning. But anyway, Matt, to you first. When you look at these two polls, what are your thoughts? I mean, they're very similar numbers, aren't they, for across the board?
Yeah, so start at the end there. So the history here has been there's a Saturday morning ties in Newspoll. So that would be the kind of expectation that's happened for at least the last 5 elections that I've been involved in. In terms of the two polls, I mean, I think it started at the point that, whatever poll we see, we can't get a Lib primary number north of 25. Much of that is eaten up in the One Nation vote. I think probably more importantly for what we're talking about in terms of the shape of the parliament, if you look at the YouGov numbers today, that there was a 64-36 Metro proposed 2PP. Looking at the primary, that's probably kind. You're probably worse than that. If you're 65-35, which of those Metro seats kind of down the pendulum can the opposition possibly hold on to?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, just fascinating. If we'd said at the start of this, when we began these episodes, would the One Nation vote hold up in polling? And we'll see on Saturday as well if that's going to be the case. I would have thought that over time it would actually fall back to something around sort of 15 points. But this is interesting. We'll talk more about that as well. Hannah, what are your initial thoughts on looking at these numbers?
Couple of thoughts from me. The first is Ashton Hurn's been leader for exactly 100 days today, and she's exceeded expectations. She's far greater than the previous couple of Liberal leaders that they've had, but obviously it hasn't managed to turn the dial when it comes to the polling. My second thought is that on One Nation, and we'll see if that materialises on election day, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's something for us to be quite concerned about, that this percentage of people are even telling pollsters that they are going to throw their vote to One Nation. If on the day it doesn't land, it makes it no less worrying.
Yeah, it's funny. That's a good point you've made there. Gone are the days where there was that theory about the secret One Nation voter that wouldn't admit in the poll or if they've got a research call that they're voting One Nation, but then would turn up on the day and vote. And that's clearly not the case now. But I think even anecdotally, you said, Hannah, at the start of when we started doing these episodes, that your own experience of door knocking in places like Rose Park is you're coming across traditional Tory voters and saying, I'm voting One Nation. I mean, that's just not... It's not what the world normally is in Adelaide.
I mean, and this is it. We've crossed this line where now people are like, all right, it's okay now to be a One Nation voter. It doesn't have that same. We're not tarred the same way that we used to be. It's a respectable vote for us to vote for One Nation, and we're saying it loud and we're saying it proud.
Matt, what are your thoughts? I have a theory that, and I've come to think about this a bit more in the last 2 or 3 electoral cycles at a national level and a Victorian state level, that the research is undersampling Labor votes. We didn't see the landslide of 2018, and I was working at head office. Like, our actual own internal numbers didn't show that we were going to absolutely clean up in the eastern suburbs. It just wasn't. It wasn't there. Same again in 22. Same at the federal level across the country, but in particular in Victoria. And I'm just wondering, that Labor 38 that's come up in both the Hedgehog and the YouGov one, is that under? Are they unders? I would like to think, I'd be really bold here, but I reckon there's going to be a 42 on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we had been talking about that 10 days ago, before we probably ended up in the fuel storage argument that we are now, I think we were probably in the territory that is the rubber band going to break, much like it did in the South Australian federal poll, and that essentially those who would otherwise be going to vote Liberal found that an unviable vote on the day. I think we're certainly there, and I will come back to it. In terms of total primary, I do think there's been a significant debate shift in the last 10 days that if there's an ability for One Nation to say that we are anybody but the uni party, how much are those petrol prices going to play into that? In terms of the primary vote itself, I think it's kind of interesting to look at. In that Rand Slam in 2006, Labor was 44.5% primary. Like, that is significantly more. They won 28 seats. The Malinowskis government now has 29 seats before they were even starting to look at any of these slides. I think probably two kind of interesting things from pre-poll this week. I was in one of the two Adelaide booths, probably the more kind of worker, as in CBD worker booth, had a husband and wife in their late kind of 50s. They were walking around looking at kind of A-frames, which a little bit odd. I said, "You guys in the seat of Adelaide?" "Yeah." And the husband said to me, "You see, we don't like Labor, but we like him." And they pointed to the Premier's photo and took two Lucy Hood how to votes and walk in. I think the enormous risk on top of every other Liberal problem that they currently have has the validation of One Nation been the final tipping point for those last remaining Liberal voters who weren't quite willing to hold their nose and put one in a Labor box on Saturday? Has the kind of attempt to make it okay to be to their right lost that last little rusted on vote that they possibly had? And if you look at a number like 66-34 or 67-33, that could be federal government areas where they don't win a booth in metropolitan Adelaide.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I should have clarified my thinking there as well. And part of the reason why I think that's happened certainly in Melbourne and particularly in the eastern suburbs is a lot of the people that live in those communities that are voting for the Labor Party are from non-English speaking backgrounds, particularly if they're speaking Mandarin, and they're not answering the phone and they're just not giving those details to voters. And I know it's always been a case amongst our working class communities anyway, because a lot of them are from migrant backgrounds and also they're busy. They're not always at home. And I know the makeup of the suburbs of Adelaide is different to Melbourne, but I am wondering if there's a new. I mean, there's migration at Adelaide. I was there a couple of weeks ago. I looked around. The place looks different to it was 10 years ago. I'm just wondering if there's a group of voters out there that we're just not picking up in the research.
Yeah, and I think to a certain extent, because of the wave of support that the government has had, you kind of haven't had to look for where those unders are because it's been so overwhelming in kind of any event. But I said, I think in a instructive sense, if there is a view that the One Nation impact, at least within the metro area, is going to be significantly lesser on us than it is going to be on the Libs, you would instinctively feel that a result of this size would have a primary somewhere near 2006. And currently have a primary that's polling 6% lower than 2006 from a starting point of having more seats before we even get to Saturday.
Yeah. Okay, there was a bit of activity this week. We had a couple of debates. There was one last Friday, and obviously we'd already published our episode, so we didn't get a chance to talk about that one. So I actually want to get your reflections on that one. That was an ABC Press Club South Australian Chamber of Commerce debate, and then there's a second debate which actually happened today. Is that right? Yep. Can you tell that I didn't see it? Which was a Sky News Adelaide Advertiser debate with KG. Someone's going to have to explain KG to everyone outside of South Australia. But let's look at the first debate to begin with. Who wants to give us a bit of a summary of what happened in that first debate, Hannah?
I'm happy to. It was a high-quality, slick debate, big turnout for it and televised on the ABC, so widely available for all voters to see before voting started. It was moderated by an ABC journo, Rory McLaren, who did, I think, a really fair job in giving both leaders equal platform. So for a little bit of context on debates, this is really the first time. Mally is known as being a talented orator and a talented debater, and I guess this is the first time that he's been challenged in a debate. It's our first chance that a lot of people have seen Ashton Hurn on that kind of stage, and I would say from all accounts she certainly stepped up and definitely outdid expectations. Because Mally is so good at it, it's sort of like, oh, he's going to be great. He's going to be excellent. He's good at speaking. He's good at debating. He knows his stuff. So it was sort of for her to get in there. She probably was a little bit slim on sort of the economic depth and the policy depth. But again, we've just said she's only been in for less than 100 days at that stage. Certainly people in the audience were quite impressed. I think there was a vote on who won the debate, and it was very, very tight. Mally did win, but only by a couple of points, which just goes to show how well she did. If the Liberals keep her as leader post-election, I think she's definitely will be a formidable opponent going forward.
Maybe we'll do a sort of a debrief of what this all means once we've done both debates. I've got questions about this particular debate, but let's then go to the second debate, which was the one that was today, that was the Sky Tizer with KG. First of all, who's KG?
KG being Kieran Gilbert from Sky.
Oh.
Everybody's favourite happy face. So
KG.
So in an entirely niche SA sense, there is a KG Cunningham who's a 90-year-old former
That's
cricketer.
what I thought it was.
Who would be the loosest debate host that you would ever
want to see that one.
But boy, oh boy, wowie. But no, stranger things happen. What did he say? GG, whatever.
I literally thought that. I just want to saw when we were doing the brief. I thought,
no, it was Kieran Gilbert. No,
why would they do that? I was like, I'm South Australia. It's so parochial. Let's get KG to do the debate. All right, sorry, my bad.
Kieran Gilbert hopping up saying "strike me pink." That's an enormously niche SA reference. No, so the Sky was forecast as essentially what they call that Western Sydney voters forum, etc., that we've seen with 100 people in the room. Usually with the kind of the Paul Murray sideshow afterwards. Hannah and I were talking today. Today's offering was a very kind of Temu version of that. It was, I thought some pretty ordinary audio rather than having voters' questions in the room. They essentially played or watching online, appeared that they had played a voter sentiment and then got both leaders to comment to it. I'll let Hannah talk, but I thought it was certainly scrappier as well. I think it was probably scrappier simply because it was the second debate and what else can you do? My kind of thoughts on Friday, having been there, in the room, I said to some people that I took afterwards that what Ashton had to do was about as unfun gets, like hopping up and having to debate, Mally with a one in front of your primary number about 95 days into the job. Just being there itself is admirable. I think it's a pretty thin veneer of putting up a fight, but like that's as shitty as politics gets. Yeah. Today, when they opened the debate and they broadcast this before, they said, and we're going to announce a bombshell at the start of the debate. And as they started the debate, they gave the YouGov poll and said, so you're down another point, you're at 18. Like, that's... nobody would want to be her, but, at the same time, this is a party that has allowed this to happen to itself. And, I don't have a whole lot of empathy for the punishment that the party's going to get. But that doesn't mean for the individual participants of that. This is a low bar.
Hannah, just gives a bit of a contrast between the two debates.
Today's was a bit scrappy. They were talking over each other a lot more. It was a bit hard to follow. One sort of interesting point that came out of today was Mally asked the same question to Ashton that he'd asked on last Friday's debate, which was the federal Liberals say they're going to scrapped the net zero target. The SA Liberals policy was to be for it. have you now scrapped it? To which she sort of didn't answer the question quite clearly, and she said, we're not scrapping it by 2027, I think it was. To which she said, well, no, we're not either. And then it became quite clear, and he said, hang on a minute, do you know the difference between net zero and like 100% renewables? And she shook her head.
Ouch.
So I was like, boom, got them. It's already up on the SA Labor Instagram as a clip, as you can imagine. But, does a voter know the difference? And do the voters care? What do they care about? They cared that yesterday inflation rates went up. They care that their electricity bills are high. They care that it costs a lot more to fill up your car at the Bowser. So again, he did get her in the debate. Does it matter in real world, in voter land? It's not going to turn. It's not going to turn any dials.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting thread there, because in both the last two kind of debates, understand where the Premier is coming from. It's been Ashton Hurn, you held a reasonable view, and now you become leader. Look at the gross kind of compromise that the weird part of your party is now making you have. There was a voice question today, and he said when the SA voice was legislated, you were one of the few Liberals who didn't vote against it. I give you enormous credit for that. Punchline, what's your vote now? And then she said, we are saying to repeal it. Her kind of response to that, which again, kind of have to work with what you have, is kind of this: why are you so focused on us and you're not focused on the real issues in front of you? Which again, it isn't a nil or draw, because the Premier's still getting to talk about what he wants to talk about. But there's been a deliberate attempt by Ashton to paint him as, you only want to talk about the fun times and you only want to talk about us. You don't want to talk about the hard stuff.
And it's a unique thing for Mally now to be debating from the position of being the leader, being the Premier. So it's it's a slightly different ball game, and obviously your aim is just not to fuck up and to not create,
and not bite back. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and not to create any stories that can build out of it and give your opponent momentum. So I'm interested to get a sense from you guys if he achieved that. And the second thing I'm interested to learn about is looking at a lot of the materials that we've been sharing on our group chat. That the argument from the Tories against Labor is very much centred on life is more expensive under Labor, since both Albanese and Malinowskis have been in charge and doing those graphics with both the Prime Minister and the Premier together. Did she try to prosecute that argument at him in either of those two debates, and did she do that successfully?
She definitely did it today, but not as well as she could have. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the campaign material, I think that's simply trying to pick up on some federal this kind of satisfaction and tag Mally with that. I think in her kind of commentary today has been a little bit more of, so what she said today, you keep saying, numbers and statistics, but that's not what it's like on the ground. That's not what people are feeling on the ground. In terms of, did he get a tick through the two debates? I thought Friday probably the closest kind of biting back thing. Ashton had kind of done a very cheap, I'm here to announce that I'll freeze politicians' pay. Will you do the same? With her kind of question to the Premier. And the Premier kind of paused and smirked and said, I thank Nick Xenophon for the question, which I thought,
Did he really?
Yeah. Which kind of all kind of passed okay without kind of a whole lot of remark. The only kind of thing that came out of it today was actually on the policy point that Hannah was talking about. The Tizer kind of tried to say that he was mansplaining the point to Ashton. I think that's probably more a clear indication of the restraint that's being showed to not cause a headline by going too hard. That's how I'd see it.
Hannah?
He chuckled a few times in the first leaders' debate, I guess, at the absurdity of some of the things getting raised. And I don't think it was a strategy, but it was good. It disarmed him. It didn't make him that aggressive mansplainer that potentially may have come out, versus a very experienced, charismatic, bold, passionate leader who happens to be a male versus this young first-term woman. I think he handled that well just because he could have a laugh at some of the things getting raised. You're obsessed with the Liberal Party. He did a chuckle instead of sort of doubling down in sort of anger and saying, well, no, I'm not. It's better to just go, that's ridiculous. So I think that played well for him.
Yeah, and the context of last Wednesday's debate, for those kind of playing at home, it was the 12 hours after the news cycle where the Libs had to dump the crazy candidate that we had talked about in our Wednesday night part, who kind of lasted about 2 hours after that, and then Alex Antic had kind of been out saying it was the end of the Liberal Party, and the weird guy had to be the weird guy's views had to be allowed because it's a broad church.
Yeah.
Maybe this is for probably unanswerable questions, but I wonder if in the production teams that organised the debates or began the negotiations with the two major parties, if they ever considered inviting One Nation to appear, given how they've been leading the polls the whole time. Like, you'd be a little bit shitty if you're the campaign director for One Nation and you're getting completely ignored.
Yeah, so there was no reference to it on Friday. I know I had conversations with people before Friday and kind of said, is Corey just going to rock up in the audience, or even worse, is Antic going to rock up in the audience? There was one very kind of deliberate reference from Kieran Gilbert today in between parts where he kind of said, Premier, you are the leader of the Labor Party. Ashton, you are the leader of the opposition. Corey is the lead candidate in the upper house, but he is not in the lower house. If he were, then there's an argument that he would be here with us today. So they kind of covered it off by saying that they don't have a leader; they have a lead candidate in the LegCo.
That's interesting. And the other thing I want to get your reflections on is, did anything happen out of these two debates that would suggest that either campaign needs to make adjustments, albeit with only 70-odd hours left to the polls, or was this just sort of going through the motions of doing the right thing by democracy and having a public debate?
I'd say there will be fallout out of today's debates in that in the Libs' most left seats, so kind of 3 of the 6 on the pendulum that they need to hold on to. I'd imagine Labor will run incredibly hard on the net zero, net renewables part. When we come to it later, I think those seats are probably past the swing already. But I would have thought in a kind of momentum sense, Labor will use that out of today. Ashton Hurn's been trying to get the Premier to say, I am sorry, over ramping, as opposed to, I wish it were different. He keeps on saying, I have said that. This is not a soundbite that I can see that the Libs can get out on DLs, other than, I don't control petrol prices or kind of something silly like that. But I would think that the net zero part will be extensively used in the next 48 hours.
Interesting. Yeah, Hannah.
I think potentially the parties might look at responding to One Nation voters within the next few days. From the first debate, when asked the One Nation question, Ashton Hurn pretty much dismissed it. The Premier said that these people's views are legitimate. There's a reason why they are pivoting to this, and we are doing X, Y, and Z, particularly in housing, and, named a couple of other things. Today, when the question got asked, again, not very much from the Liberals, and from the Premier, there was a slight pivot where he sort of said, well, the leader of your party of that party is in Queensland, and I'm a proud South Australian, focused on South Australia. Again, I just think out of the debates that's interesting. I wouldn't, if I were the Liberals, I would be seriously thinking about spending the next few days trying to get those One Nation, those people that are telling the pollsters that they're voting One Nation, into the Liberal camp. We've talked about are the polls real? Well, election day is Saturday. They've got a few days to get those votes away from One Nation and back into the Liberal camp.
Sticking with you, Matt, good old thought there.
Yes, I mean don't know what day it is. We have 4 days into pre-poll now, and there's no doubt that One Nation is ahead of the Libs in a majority of seats. So if you're talking about the safer Labor seats where the Libs are only ever going to be 30% anyway, I think there's a pretty strong view that most of that is kind of, all that non-Labor vote has just shifted immediately over to a One Nation camp. If you're talking about independent seats where you have a safe Lib against the independent who may be on high teens or mid-20s or something, it looks like the Conservative vote has splintered in half and you're essentially independent first, One Nation second and Lib third. We're only about 20% through the vote over the last 4 days, but that's still a significant number. There is behaviour in terms of organisation at pre-polls, etc., where One Nation is the vote for the people that aren't willing to vote for the government, as opposed to the Libs, and that's something. I mean, that isn't even Queensland 98. That's a completely different dynamic that people have found the Liberal Party unviable to vote for. And if they're not willing to hold their nose and vote for Labor, they are happy to pass that vote straight through to One Nation. And when Hannah was talking about the Libs just before, I think one of the enormous problems about the risk that Ashton has taken, when you validate One Nation, you can't even say you're sure you want to vote for them anymore. Like as soon as it's okay to vote for them, people have said, cool, we will.
Actually, she said on today's debate, when asked about One Nation, that voters might be looking at voting for One Nation to spice things up. Yes, she did. Yeah, it's not why. It's not why. We know quite clearly, or, I would at least hope that she does know why people are looking at One Nation. But we haven't seen a coordinated campaign from really either side coming out and addressing those One Nation voters quite clearly. And it's less necessary for Labor, who of course are leading in the polls and getting a substantial primary vote. But again, it's surprising from the Liberals. But like Matt said, if they're preferencing them, if they basically legitimise the vote, then it's quite hard to come out and discredit them in the same breath.
Let's spice things up. Why would you say that? That's the equivalent if you're at the bar and you look at your mates and you say, do you want to get fucked up? And then you start doing shots. She's basically just said to everyone, let's do shots. Let's all just vote for One Nation. Why would you do that?
I know. On the list of options in front of her at the moment, that is one of them. So.
Oh my God.
Oh. No, I mean, it was in the context of people, and I'm not mounting a defence here at all. It was in the contents of people feel that they are unhappy and therefore they're taking a crazy risk and they're taking drugs in college, essentially. Like it was more like that kind of. It was more like it was that kind of earlier line. But again, I think the fundamental problem of this is you either fight them or you validate them, and once you validate them, what do you do next? And
Matt,
how do you have to push back in your own seats?
Matt, what college did you happen to go to?
I went to Mount Barker High, mate. There's nothing as fancy as that.
Okay, fair enough.
No, it's actually, whilst going back to him, it's an old Nick Xenophon line that when we went through all the history of everyone being asked if they, inhaled during university or something, he would always say, no, I did worse. I joined the Liberal Party.
Yeah. Oh, that we miss his shit humour. Okay, actually, I feel like we're going into talking really about the One Nation, and Hannah, I was going to get you to give a bit of what the week that was. Let's do that, and then let's go back into dive into some of the things we are taking about what we've seen from both leaders and also One Nation and unpack that. So I'm super interested to keep on sticking with that. I'm also obviously keen. We really want to get into talking about the seats,
Yes.
And I reckon there's a lot of nerds out there going, "Oh, stuff with the bloody, back and forth on what the colour of the campaign. Just give me the freaking seats, man." So, Hannah, just give us a bit of an overview of the week it was, and then we can talk about what things fell out of where the candidates were going. Where the candidates were and what that says about the campaign.
As you can expect, because voting's already started, there's been very little in the way of policy or local commitments. They're already out the door and on the ground. All candidates and MPs are now on the pre-polls for the week. The problematic Liberal candidate that we discussed last week was dropped hours after we talked about him before the pod was even on air, which is we're just really that good. Yeah. Allegedly at the request of the deputy leader, Ben Hood, rather than at the request of the leader, Ashton Hurn. There was a little bit to the sort of journos were trying to turn that into a little bit of a story. She didn't really bite on that. Apparently the candidate is still working in party HQ, though. Then we saw post-debate on the weekend, leaders were behind the bar pouring beers. So Matt would love that Ashton was up in Hammond, so we love talking about Hammond. So Ashton was up pouring beers with the local member up in Hammond.
At the Swanport Hotel, which is the old, fun fact, it's the old Puzzle Park. There you go.
I didn't know that, actually.
It is. It's the old Puzzle Park. Candidate for Hammond, you should know this.
Did you go there? Did you actually go there, Hannah?
I went and chucked up a couple of cornflakes on Stovey Falls, Stephen, because that's my favourite activity. And that's
that's what most safe Labor MPs do anyway, so it's no different.
Then we saw Mally hitting up Rundle Street. So he went to what may be the now infamous Exeter Hotel, where Alex Antic and Corey Bernardi shared a beer. Mally's pouring beers behind the bar then, and then hit up a local nightclub, Crybaby in the city. He was stopped for selfies by all of these. What are we calling them? Gen Zs? I don't know. The young people.
He was mobbed.
He was absolutely mobbed, and what a campaign strategy from a time where we need to be activating the youth vote. So and pumped all that out on his socials as well. We sort of were talking about this earlier. One Nation, we were sort of going, okay, 1 week to go. Will we now start seeing some of those attacks on One Nation? And really overall, we haven't. There's been one piece that I've seen from our comrades at SA unions, but apart from that, nothing really from the major parties. The Premier sort of has been talking about issues that may be relevant to One Nation voters, but we haven't seen very much. There was one hit piece, if you want to call it that, about one Nation candidate essentially saying he's only lived in Adelaide for a short period of time. He's from interstate. So considering they are running a candidate in all lower house seats and candidates in the upper house, we were just saying before, we were expecting a few of these candidates to be a bit wild, to be sort of like the problematic Liberal candidate, but none of that has come to the fore. They have certainly proven themselves to be much more organised, much more disciplined, and in a way that we haven't seen before. On our pre-poll today in Colton, which is one of our marginal seats that Labor is gunning for, there were 10 volunteers in orange shirts awaiting the arrival of Malcolm Roberts, the senator, One Nation senator. Pauline's been in town campaigning. So it's this alongside their social media sort of campaign as well. It's just like nothing we've ever seen, and definitely it's getting a little bit of attention.
It's interesting, isn't it? I guess I'm wondering, is there no? I mean, the attack on that particular candidate was pretty weak by attack standards. Is it not happening because it's not been a priority of the Labor campaign in terms of their research unit? Is it not happening because One Nation has cleaned themselves up and have selected candidates of reasonable quality? I question that. It cannot possibly be the case. If the Liberal Party, who is meant to be the mainstream centre-right party, can't select decent candidates, how the hell is One Nation finding them, when they've just, sort of arrived on the scene in the last 20 minutes? It's fascinating that we haven't now been able to, or has it just not been a priority? Like, it's just strategically, like, let's just look after our own, let's get our people over the line. All we're here to do is form government, get the seats we need. I don't know. I find it interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we are still 72 hours to go, but granted that it's running very, very close to the line. I think if you look at what are those objective answers, there is a rational case for, whilst they're harming them, leave them alone. And the only kind of attack that the party's made has been on the crazy Lib candidate as opposed to the crazy One Nation candidate. Agree with Hannah entirely that their organisation is far more sophisticated and far more organised. At the same time, the kind of legalised cannabis people that I've been at on pre-poll are actually really highly organised and doing a far better job at the same time. So I think probably the biggest part has been when you're seen as a protest party, you just can't get the yard up about who the unimportant candidate is. Compared to when you're trying to be an alternate premier and all the craziness of the polls, I kind of always see the kind of Mason-Dixon line as being the, do you want to be premier? Xenophon crossed that and it was held to account of being a party of government. Whilst you got Corey kind of still being we're the party of protest, and changing media landscape for what was 8 years on, let alone 8 years before that. I think they've just been left alone because no one's taken them seriously. If there was a world where they were in line to win 5 Labor seats on Saturday, I assure you it would be a very, very fundamental different approach. Whilst there is a enormous impact in terms of how the vote will spray, up until this point, it's I think it's been seen as something which continues to tear the Libs apart and leave them to it. I'm not saying that's my view, but... No,
I think it's interesting. And going back to the original point you made earlier on in the show, Matt, when you talked about what the Metro polling numbers were, it indicates to us that this One Nation vote is primarily happening in the regions and where it's happening in metropolitan Adelaide, it's not going to be an issue for Labor candidates. Like, they will easily get over the line. I guess I think I'm probably thinking a bit more long-term. And one of the points I found super interesting from our last show when you're talking about when we had that conversation about funding and the amount of money you get from votes and how that can make you win going forward. I'm thinking more long-term sustainability for both the Liberal Party and One Nation, what that means in terms of the next South Australian state election, the next federal election, and the resources. Like, one of the reasons why I think many reasons why One Nation's never been an actual formidable opponent is because they've never had the financial resources. They're clearly getting a lot of support from Jenna Reinhardt. I mean, that's quite obvious. But in an external way, not obviously, I know with the funding laws in South Australia, she can't. But you can help in other ways. But if they are successful in getting a 22, 23, 24% primary, to your point last week, Matt, they're going to have a lot of money. And if you've got money, I
mean, currently they'll have more money than the Liberal Party will.
That's nuts.
They would have a larger spending cap at the 2030 state election than the Liberal Party will. And that's almost unchangeable now. Like, even if there is a dip in the polls, they probably still end up ahead of the Libs.
Yeah, amazing.
Matt sort of made the point, but I just want to go back on it. When Nick Xenophon ran a candidate in every single lower house seat, because he was a sitting member, he was then viewed as an alternate premier and got put up against the other too, and had to come up with policies on everything. He couldn't no longer be the sort of no pokey sort of member. He had to justify his position, because One Nation hasn't had to do that in South Australia. And I think they've actually come out and say, no, we never said that we've got policies and everything. We've got these few policies, and vote for us because of that. So they are getting away with it a little bit, and you just go, okay, well, what does this mean for other state elections? What does that then mean federally? Do we only scrutinise parties of government or not? I don't think we've even talked about the Greens on this podcast. At what stage do you start to go, they're a credible threat, and we should start scrutinising them and their policies?
Yeah, and in a world where they get low to mid 20s, they get a whole lot of public funding, they get 2 seats in the upper house, could possibly jag a third. I think there's a world where there's 1 or 2 Liberal seats that they could possibly jag in a lower house sense. It starts to get really unfunny really quickly. Like if they have a footing in a parliament, and what that means for Canberra commentary and each of those things, let alone the resources that sit underneath. And we know they're all crazy and they all leave the party and ha, 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 ha. If they end up with 5 people in a parliament compared to 2, that's an entirely different scenario. That is a footing. Well, that is more than the Greens have ever had in the history of South Australian politics.
Yeah, I mean, and watching the progression of the party over the years, it's like they're moving up through different divisions in the English football leagues. There's certain expectations once you get into Division 2. There are certain expectations once you get in the Championship, and there are certain expectations once you get into the Premier League, and that tests you and your ability to win elections. Let's get into the bit that we all love the most. Let's talk about the seats, because we all want to put a fiver on a whole bunch. And
if Sportsbet gave us
what is with that? Why is there no odds from the betting agencies on the seats?
Because betting companies don't lose anymore, so they've just absented them the space and taken away our freedoms to have individual seat bets. So no, it's the only wagering that is still available is Labor to form government at $1.01, so you get 1% interest for the day, and TAB's even taken that down, so that's actually only available with some of the others. There's been no other market at any point, much to everybody's distress, disdain. So there's market opening for any online gambling agencies listening to this podcast who want to put up a seat by seat market in the next 48 hours.
This is how illegal gambling starts. Someone starts running their own book.
Send us your details.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do a seat analysis then. Where are the seats that we should be looking at on when we're watching the telecast on Saturday night? What are the seats that we should be keeping an eye on? And I'm keen to get a sense of the seats that we should keep an eye on to start with anyway, to get a sense of how deep Labor's victory is going to be. Like, where are the seats you're going to just sort of check quickly and go, shit, okay, big swings towards us already. This is going to be a good night.
Yeah, so if we can put the seats into 3 different columns and kind of start from there. So in a normal pendulum sense, in a Labor versus Liberal scenario where there's no real concern about what a 2PP count looks like in terms of whatever the orange vote ends up being, Labor currently has 29. If you're going down that pendulum stream, you have the seat of Morialta, where the former Deputy Leader John Gardner is retiring. The seat of Unley, which Labor's not held since the early 90s. The seat of Hyson, which Labor's never held, who are going to love the net zero stuff. The seat of Hartley, which is former leader Vincent Tarzia. The seat of Morphett, again, which I don't think Labor's held since the 80s or so. And then the seat of Colton, Hannah spoke before about Aria Bolkus, Nick Bolkus's daughter, running against what is a new candidate as opposed to a sitting member, which I think is probably quite instructive there. And then the one at the farthest kind of outreach of the pendulum is the seat of Bragg, which Hannah spoke about Burnside on in our earlier episodes, which is essentially the seat of Sturt. That is the order through the pendulum that gets Labor from 29 through to 36. The two then odd seats that sit outside of that, there's a seat at Nadri, which is a country seat where Tony Piccolo, the member for Light, former minister. Tony Piccolo was elected 20 years ago today, so congratulations, Tony, March the 18th. Running against a sitting Liberal member, pretty new area, pretty weird One Nation spray. One Nation might finish second. Who knows whether that kind of complicates things, but that's not a traditional Labor-Lib contest. And then everything comes back to Hammond, the seat of Hammond, where
government passes through Hammond.
And I do hope that everybody's, read up on Birth of the Bunyip after last week. But so the seat of Hammond will be a genuine four-way primary contest. Labor's very popular mayor, the long-term Liberal MP, Adrian Peterick, also 20 years today. Happy anniversary, Peds. Together with a One Nation candidate, and then a independent who polled 15% last time. So there is a world where that ends up being 22-20, 20-20 kind of a scenario. And whilst I think there's comfort in the One Nation vote flowing back, whilst I think there's probably understanding that the Lib kind of One Nation how to vote may not follow for those that are leaving anyway, I think they are probably the two that you don't see in a normal kind of pendulum sense. The last kind of remaining interest seats, which are probably the biggest structural problems for the Libs, I would say, is the seat of Flinders, which is Port Lincoln on the far west coast. You've got a very safe Lib MP up against two independents, including one extraordinary woman called Megan Petherick. Again, it'd be a four-way contest unless there's a huge One Nation number. You would imagine she would win. Complete other end of the state, seat of Mount Gambier. The guy who's run Troy Bell's electorate office whilst Troy's been in court and then in prison, a guy called Travis Fatchin is enormously popular down there. I'd go as far to say that he might win on primary, which would mean since 97 the Libs have held it for 2 years before the guy got charged and had four different independents in that time. And then the seat of Finnis, which is the highest pre-poll, which insert every Victor Harbour retiree joke that you would like to, but they were far and ahead leading on pre-poll last night. The seat of Finnis, there's an independent, Lou Nicholson, who came perilously close. I think it was like 600 votes of unseating the safe Lib MP David Basham last time. She'll win in a canter. So the other three losses from the Libs to the independents you can expect on election night. Then in the seat of Carvel, you've got an independent replacing an independent, so that really doesn't have an impact. So just to go back over that, you've got the Lib versus Labor pendulum, the first seat to fall being Morialta, the last seat to fall being Bragg, the two really strange contests being Nadri and Hammond, the home of Birth of the Bunyip, and then 6 different independent contests out of that where the Libs will find it really, really hard to not lose another 3 seats.
Well, can I tell you a story about Morialta and Hartley? I came over in, what was the year? Was it the 2002 election, 02 or 01?
02 was when Rand won the first time. 06 was when Labor won those seats.
I can't tell you. I was in high school.
Well, sit back, Hannah, and let me tell you a tale. So I came over. I was an organiser at the SDA, and I came over on the Friday night with a carload of young Labor guys. I had to go hand out in Hartley,
which was Joe Scalzi.
Yeah,
Joe Scalzi was a member of Hartley.
But I had to go hand out for the Greens because we were trying to up the Green vote. Yep. But the trouble was that the Greens hadn't printed enough how to vote cards for Hartley, and there was like a joint booth that they wanted me to go to that had Hartley and sort of Morialta. And so I called up the Greens and said, "Hi, I just absolutely lied through my teeth. I said, "Hi, I'm over here. I want to go hand out for the Greens. Can I get some header votes for Hartley?" And they said, "Oh, it's not really one of our priorities. Can you go to Morialta?" And I was like, I can't. I'm on the phone, and the campaign organizer, Lopez, look at me, and I'm telling them what they're saying. And I've said, oh, no, I'm staying at my grandma's and I don't have a car and I'm literally in the middle of the election of Hartley. They're going, oh, that's all right. We can get someone to come pick you up. And I was like, dude. Anyway, so I ended up going to Morialta and I was on a booth that had – the green volunteer had a white, like boxes of sort of half and half for Morialta and for Hartley. And I started hanging out with him. I feel terrible about this now. He said to me,
them and went back to Hartley, didn't you?
Yeah, he said, I just need to go to the Dunny. Can you look after the stuff? I said, yeah, no worries, mate. He went to the toilet. I stole half his out of votes, jumped in a car and drove to Hartley and had out for the rest of the day. Oh, man. And this is back in the days when the Democrats were around. The Democrats and the Greens had some internal shit fight.
Yeah.
In South Australia, and no one wanted to talk to me. The Democrat didn't want to talk to me. Labor didn't want to talk to me. And when I told the Labor Party person, I'm actually from Victoria, I'm actually Labor Party, he was furious that I was doing that. And the only person that would talk to me was the guy from Family First who was like in some church and his pastor had asked me to go hand out. And he was so lovely to me. I was there all day. I was so tired from driving over overnight. Anyway, so whenever I see Morialta and Hartley, I get chills. I'm so tired even looking at those words.
That is a full essay story. And the member for Morialta at that point would have been Joan Hall, the wife of former Liberal Premier Steele.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you were going to get family first. Remember when we had interstate volunteers put your family first?
Yep.
Love that sort of stuff in South Australia.
That's beautiful.
As Leon Bignell still says, they don't own the colour and they don't own the word.
Okay.
Can I just go onto the seats quickly?
Please.
I don't. The pendulum that Matt ran through there, significantly as well. Morialta, Unley, Colton are all retiring Liberal ministers. So, quite well-known incumbents are not contesting this election as well. So they've got brand new Liberal candidates there.
Morialta, Colton, and what was the third one, Hannah?
Unley.
Which we'll come to later.
Yeah. So am I right then in saying that the 38th seat that Labor could win is Hammond?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else about the seats?
I can just do a tiny Legco wrap-up if you want. So if you're looking at current polls, Labor gets 5 again. Labor's never got 5 in the history of the parliament until last time. And it's kind of set to this time. Probably one caveat on that is if there is a crazy One Nation bleed from Labor to Libs, from Labor to them, what does that mean for that 5th upper house spot? If we get tipped away by 2 or 3 points upstairs, is that enough to drag us down? I think it's unlikely, but it would be occupying some people's minds. The Libs are no chance of getting past 2. So that would leave them with only 6 members upstairs in a 22-person parliament. The Greens will absolutely get 1. You'd imagine One Nation will absolutely get 2, which then leaves 1 less. Which leaves 1 left. I'd say if you narrowed it down, a guy called Stephen Polaris, who's a former DPP here, has drawn A. So is that donkey vote kind of enough to get 30,000 votes? There's a chance for that. Legalised cannabis polled really well federally here last time, and obviously have seats in the Victorian and the West Australian parliaments. If they were to get there, Labor's preference them 3rd after the Greens. I did send it to you the other day, the legalised cannabis, how to vote. If you want to have a look at something until your eyes go square, have a look at that. The other 2 live options would be Jing Lee, former Liberal, who's not running as a Lib this time, who's always had a really extraordinary personal multicultural vote. There's a world where she gets there. And then,
I'm hearing she's running a quite excellent multicultural campaign as well. She's very, very popular. So definitely,
she's had a person on a booth she's had a person on the booth for half the time that I've been on there this week. So kind of decent kind of volunteer effort. And then the 4th one, which is there, Connie Benaras, who's the last kind of remaining Xenophon person on the parliament, who Hannah spoke about last week when she called Corey Bernardio Malacca. She actually had to go at Hanson and Corey at a press conference today as well. So she is certainly shooting her shots. But it's essentially those 4 or a crazy One Nation overflow, getting them to 3, which is the state of that 11th seat in the big red chairs.
Interesting.
I'm expecting a bit of a low voter turnout too, just anecdotally when I've been letterboxing, when I've been door knocking, a significant amount of unenrolled houses and no cornflakes on Stobie polls this election has made an impact, Stephen. People don't know the election's on. Today's front page of the Advertiser didn't even cover a single state election story. 3 days out from an election. I've been door knocking and literally saying, I'm here for this person, just letting you know when an election's happening, because it's just not getting the coverage that an election campaign normally would. The other little tidbit as well is that we also concurrently have the First Nations Voice to Parliament vote happening this Saturday as well. I know I'm obviously not the target audience to be voting in that, but I have seen very, very little advertising of that one too. Seen a tiny little bit from a couple of candidates with creative content on socials, but apart from that, no real messaging on The Voice.
Is that a compulsory vote, Hannah?
I don't believe so.
No.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting.
So in terms of pre-poll, I just looked at the current numbers today. So today was steady. I would have argued vehemently that Saturday was going to be an enormous pre-poll, and it was actually the same as Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday has been. So we were 70,000 Monday, 70,000 Saturday, 66 Monday, 67 Tuesday, and 70,000 again today. So depending on what your turnout number is, that's as low as 5% a day, as high as 7% a day, depending on your expected turnout. But I would argue that we're tracking at 40% of those who vote will have voted before Saturday. It's just how low that total number is.
Okay, let's go to campaign content sponsored by the Glendy Festival. If you're ever in Adelaide during the Glendy Festival, go down there and you'll get some good quality meat. Hannah, I'm going to go to you because I think actually, no, both of you have been doing a fair bit of digging around and checking out what kind of content we've seen during the campaign. I'll go to you first, Hannah, and then come to you, Matt, second. What's some of the stuff that's jumped out at you in terms of campaign content you've seen on the hustings?
I've talked about the Premier's focus on getting kids off screens and sort of the education and that sort of thing. I saw a creative content from him, which I quite liked. It was the old school tuck shop. What do you guys call it in Victoria? The tuck shop bag, the canteen. Yeah. I'm not sure. Yeah, name. The lunch order bags from primary school. Name, PM, order 1 meat pie, 1 chocky milk, and then free school fees and free school camps, and sort of did it that way. I just found that a little creative. The other one that has turned up in the letterbox of my parents' house, Unley electorate residents, has been the 4 leaders in 4 years on the front and on the back. You say you're tough on crime, but... and then has all their candidates that have been charged with crimes. I think at the first debate there was a call out from the Premier to the Leader of the Opposition to say, you've got more criminals in your party than you do women, which is a great hot take.
It was. I liked the two things you've just named there, Hannah. I loved both of them. Obviously, the nostalgia for a certain generation of the lunch orders. I don't know if that happens anymore, but that was fantastic. But also, that was the neg on the Tories. It just if you're Liberal Party headquarters and you saw that, you'd be like, that really annoys me. What about you, Matt? What have you seen jump out at you that's been of interest you want to share?
No, I probably think more kind of interestingly on a content sense. I had 2 kind of professional colleagues raise concerns about the negative, oddly, about the reproduction of the Spears photo. And I was kind of saying, well, if your kid sees the front page of the paper or any kind of news service during the line, how is that different? But I just thought there was kind of, interesting pushback that is there something that is there a different threshold of what we put in front of people as opposed to what the news puts in front of people?
The photo, of course, is the one of him with the white powder.
And a $5 note. Let's never forget a $5 note.
Okay, very good. Let's go to our categories now, brought to you by The Curiosity Show and Come On Kids, two of the greatest children's shows produced in South Australia. Finally, we have a Tory with a typewriter nomination. Someone decided to write something.
We have 3 nominations, Stephen. They all waited to the last week to come out. So just as you were talking about Matthew Abraham last week, he's come out with an op-ed. Then we've got an editorial from The Advertiser, and then we've got the ex-politician Alexander Downer all coming out. The Matthew Abraham one, essentially very, very long, basically calling voters zombies, saying they're just, walking towards this election with no idea what's going on, no real scrutiny. Then I'll sort of layer it with Alexander Downer's, which is trying to dissuade people from voting for minor parties. People don't like getting told they're stupid. People don't like getting told who to vote for. And they don't like getting told that voting for a minor party is a waste of their vote. So that's essentially what I read in those 2 editorials. But I want to spend most of my time focusing on the editorial from The Advertiser, which is on a recent announcement by the government on the right to disconnect, which we've obviously seen come through the federal parliament. This essentially is giving public servants the right to only, to disconnect when they're not working.
That's our normal work hours, yeah.
That's our normal work hours, indeed. So this was fought for locally by SA unions again, and it was a great win for the workers of South Australia. The editorial went on the attack to say, well, Mally has been quite good in championing productivity and championing business. This is going to undo all of that. This right only applies to employees earning over $150,000. It excludes sort of ministerial staffers and the like. The example then used in the editorial was, well, what if we need to make a phone call to a nuclear engineer after 5 o'clock to get them to an emergency? Where do I start with this one? Number one, I'd be a bit worried that a nuclear engineer is earning less than $150,000 a year. Number 2, I'd be quite concerned that a nuclear engineer is a SA government public servant. Potentially they're a federal public servant.
Yeah.
And number 3, the right to disconnect is the right to disconnect on reasonable grounds. I think it's saying if you reasonably don't answer the phone after hours, you can't face punitive measures. Of course, if there's a nuclear emergency, I'd like to think that maybe somebody would be on call in that situation.
Yeah, I'd like to hope they took the call. I don't think they're so focused on work to rule. They're going, sorry, mate, that's going to have to wait till Monday.
And I just, this one got sent to me by a few people because it was so absurd, and it sort of smacked to me like, do you think the election's almost here and we haven't come out against him enough? So let's just, here's something, let's just come out against this. They would be much better off coming out and saying, is this something we really need potentially? How many public servants are getting punished for not taking phone calls after 5 p.m? Instead, they actually really came out and said, this will be bad for productivity. So you're going, so do you think people should have to answer the phone at 6 o'clock? I don't, yeah. So I think that one's got to be the winner for the week.
So it was the Adelaide Actual Advertisers editorial board that wrote that, so not a particular.
It was the editor of the Advertiser, Gemma Jones.
Gemma, congratulations! Your very first Tory with a typewriter award for 2026. Okay, let's go to probably unanswered questions. You guys didn't have any from memory. I've got two questions. First of all, if David Spears hadn't consumed white powder with a $5 note, would the Liberal Party be in a better position than they are right now?
No.
I think the vast majority of their problems are the inherently federal overlay. I'm not saying the federal caucus, but the federal overlay of the fight for the party. It's the left versus right fight for the identity of the party. It's the cosplay canavan face paint. There is an argument that I think there's an argument that the Spears stuff hasn't been catastrophic enough because of the broader shit show context that it's in. I think if you had the Spears convictions as they were in a normally functioning political party, it would have been far worse. But we are so far. I mean, Premier said in that first debate on Friday that the Liberal Party has jumped the shark in a kind of antic sense. And I think there's probably a pretty decent summation of where we are, that we are making the ridiculous credible and driving the bar so low that, again, returning to where we were before, pretty hard to put a threshold on the validity of one nation candidates when you got major party candidates who can't pass the most simple of kind of background checks.
And I think we've talked about it a few times. It's not just the leader; it's the sort of the whole bench strength. Peter Malinauskas has an incredible team behind him as well, an incredible machine behind him. Even if you could have the most outstanding leader, and still they would be they would be fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, I would say if you go back to 2020, in halfway through the first term of that Marshall government, if you create a scenario where Stephen Knoll, who retired at 2022, was still in the parliament, Sam Dulac, who left the party and then left the parliament, Dan Van Holst-Pellecan, who became their deputy premier, and Corey Wingard, who also lost. If you create a world where those four are in the parliament now, Spears and Tarzia wouldn't ever have been leader if those four had been in the parliament. But even in a world where Ashton had those four around her now, the Premier is still a generational talent, but the state Libs wouldn't be the complete, as every pre-poll cornflake currently screams, the shambles that they currently are.
Okay, who's got a hottest take of the week?
So I'll be sweary in mine, only because I have some colleagues on pre-poll today. One of my colleagues was at Hartley, and the Lib volunteer said, "Do you want to speak to the candidate, Vincent Tarzia?" And the voter said, "Fuck no."
Hot take.
Which is enormously unfair on Vincent, who's actually enormously good company. But I think that's how the rubber band is broken. There was also a very lovely brag voter today from Kensington who told me that she was voting Labor with a enormous wink because she really liked the young Greek boy, the Premier, which is enormously different given how much he's made of his incredible heritage.
They're close. The countries are close. It's all Eastern Europe.
You can have that conversation with the Premier. Yeah.
He's definitely not coming on the show now. Mel Meninga In Over My Head Award, which we seem to have had each week, which is a testimony to South Australian politics.
It's a follow-on from the same rolling shit show. So, again, for those at home, week one, former Crows Hall of Fame inaugural captain Chris McDermott ran for a lower house seat, then a week later changed his mind, ran for an upper house seat, number one on Sarah Game ticket, who was the One Nation elected person before she quit that party. During last week's episode, Chris McDermott had left that party. Sarah Game had disendorsed him. In the episode that never ends, Sarah Game has now done an open letter to South Australians attached to what is essentially a hostage video in a car saying, "Do not vote for my party. It is imperative that you only vote below the line for the father of 8 pro-lifer. Do not vote for my party." and the open letter is, kindly 4 pages long.
Is there a lot of caps lock?
Read it. You have to read it.
I feel like I want to put that up on the Instagram page as well.
And again, going back to last week, that Fair Go ticket is number 2 on the Legco How to Vote card. So the empty seat is number 2 from the Libs.
From left to right?
No, they have made it their second preference.
Oh, wow.
Labor's made it their 6th preference, but there is an empty chair where the owner of the head of the party is saying do not vote for it, and it's preference 2 on Lib How to Vote.
Yeah, okay. That's beautiful. Marginal seat Hunger Games. Who's got one?
So the seat of Unley, sorry, I was just reading through it. Seat of Unley, again, Labor hasn't held it since the 90s. There's a Labor candidate called Alice Rolls, enormously present, had huge support from the Premier. Premier gave the pre-campaign rev up there on Sunday, which we've got time, happy to come back to and kind of paraphrase what was essentially a pre-grand final address. Pre-poll this week has been absolutely enormous. You've had ministers, more than 10 volunteers at any time, a whole lot of Libs at any point of the queue length on what has been a very, very, very busy pre-poll, doing 1,600, 1,700 a day. You've had party officials outnumbering voters at all times.
Lovely. Well, that's great. Well, I'm looking forward to election night. Okay, let's wrap it up by getting final thoughts from both of you. Starting first of all with who won the week. Hannah?
I would say the Premier still won the week, but marginally. But I would also say it doesn't really matter now because voting's well underway. There hasn't been a nudge in the polls despite Ashton's performances in the debates. He's managed to do what he needed to do, which is not make any headlines this week, just business as usual. The ground game's been quite good from Labor at pre-polls, very efficient, very, all booth staffed. Tidying up Mallee victory for our final week.
Nice. To you, Matt, as well. Who do you think won the week?
I think I'm overall with Hannah that it is so late in the process. It doesn't matter. Like we are in entirely uncharted poll territory. It was about nothing going wrong, and we absolutely have. I'd probably more in a kind of civic sense that I would say that it has been the democratic process that is above all else. I spent 4 days on pre-poll. For those on YouTube, I have props. Look at how absolutely rooted my shoes are. 24 hours on pre-poll. It has been entirely civil. It's been wonderful. Voters are good. Everyone who's going to work has no idea the election's on. Everyone who is going there to vote is kind, civil, warm. We are so fortunate for what we have, and that has to be celebrated above all else.
Absolutely. Now, enough of the niceties. Let's actually make some predictions. How many seats do we think we're going to win? Who wants to go first? And you don't have to make a prediction if you don't want to. But if you are in the interest of doing, I'm going to go out and say we're going to win all of them, and we're going to win Hammond because I just feel like we've talked about Hammond so much each week that God damn it, if we don't win it, I'll be annoyed. So I reckon we'll get 38 seats.
Oh.
Yeah, I'll go first. The Libs are only safe in 2, being Schubert and Chafee. If they're going to win a third, it will be McKillop, where Nick McBride, if you have a look on his Facebook, is still wearing his Home D anklet. If they're going to win a third, it's there. There'll be 6 independents, possibly lose 1 to One Nation. If you add those 2 up, you get to 38 with a question mark over Hammond and Nadgery. So, I think after today's poll and after the net zero stuff, I'm not saying 36 is the floor because 36 is an extraordinary number on the base of 28 being the highest electoral victory in South Australians history. Libs would have a view they couldn't win any of those 36 Metro seats.
Brutal. Hannah?
Yeah, I was going to say 36 as well. And on the Nick McBride, I think he put out something this week, was it, Matt? And he, I proudly live in my electorate. I'm proudly always here. And like Matt pointed out, of course you do. You're on home detention.
Oh man! Hey, make lemons out. Make lemonade of lemons. That's what he's doing.
A Facebook post was, I live and work here in MacLeod. Living and working in MacLeod, proud to call this region home. Well, there's a court order saying that you can't leave. Just in one closing part, getting part of that. There's an ABC story during the week where he was concerned that he'd been unfairly tagged for being on Home D. And his actual quote was, I've got a working with children's pass that's been put in jeopardy, Mr. McBride said. I've never, ever interfered or hurt children, but the fact I've ended up in friggin' jail because of this bogus shit that happened on the 27th, that is James Stevens' level of political communications. Never repeat the charge.
Oh, man. I kind of want to end the show there.
Yeah, I think we're done.
Where will you be on election day, or do you have any sort of superstitions or kind of routines or rituals?
Well, for the last 5 elections, I've started the morning with Leon Bignell, who was elected 20 years ago today in Mawson. He calls me his stable pony, which is enormously unfair. He's of course not running this time, so I need to find a new election morning routine. I think I'll find Lucy Hood somewhere and spend the morning with her and try to keep her vaguely calm.
Good stuff. And Hannah, where are you going to be?
This is actually my first election in South Australia in quite a long time. As you know, I did a decent stint up in Darwin. So, good to be back home for the election day. I now have 2 little ankle biters at home, so I'm sorting them out first thing in the morning before heading out to Newland to help out Olivia Savis, and then over to the seat of Lee to help out David Wilkins, both good friends of mine who my children call respectively Auntie Olivia and Uncle David, and who one day when they're a bit older I'll have to tell them not everybody's aunties and uncles are members of Parliament. Fantastic. Well, I hope the both of you have a wonderful Saturday, the Festival of Democracy, and that it's a great celebration for the Labor Party in South Australia on Saturday night. I know we really haven't mentioned much of, obviously we've spoken about the Premier, but we haven't spoken about the campaign staff. But to all the guys at headquarters, you've run a great campaign. I hope you have the fruits of your labour come home. No pun intended.
Yeah, and it is worth acknowledging that running a 40-seat Bruno West Wing strategy is enormously different to running a 10-target seat on the top of 26. Like this has been a stretch, and a really big stretch at that. And Eamon and his team deserve enormous credit out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope they have a great night on Saturday night as well. But I'm looking forward to talking to you two next week when we do our election coverage recap of obviously the results and election night coverage too. And if you're privileged enough to have 2 screens at home, you can have the South Australian election on one and the tellies on the other. Absolutely. Let's hope it's a double win for the good guys or gals.
See you guys.
Cheers. Bye. Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.